I'm Ryan Jeffrey, and this is the Passionate About OSS podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to shine a light on the brilliant minds of the OSS and telco industry, to describe some of their background, their knowledge, tips and techniques. So today we'll be taking a look at building an OSS BSS from scratch for a mid-market telco. Our guest today has been absorbed in the creation of a fully customised OSS BSS for a mid-tier telco /ISP since 2009. And he started the journey straight out of uni, and the project has really evolved brilliantly to the unique needs of the company that he worked with. So this has really meant that the project, and our guest's thinking, hasn't really been steered by the biases of other companies in the industry, so the vendors and the carriers. But over the 12-year period, their solution has clearly evolved to where it has today as a result. I'm delighted to have him on the call for a couple of reasons. So one is to retrace some of the journey that he and the company took. Another is to discuss some of the innovations they made in isolation from the traditional telco and the traditional OSS models. And another one is just to unpack some of the in-flight refactoring decisions that they made to take on a journey to the cloud and to become cloud native. So welcome today to Stephen White.
Thanks, Ryan. Pleasure to be here.
Delighted to have you on. So Stephen and I first met only recently, so 2019, when I was helping out a buyer conduct a due diligence prior to the purchase of the company that Stephen worked for, Cirrus Communications. They're now known as Swoop. For his sins, Stephen was handed the unenviable task of responding to all of my questions during that due diligence. Despite all of the questions coming thick and fast from the buyer's representatives and like myself, you were still really able to perform your day job doing all the BAU tasks of an OSS and BSS admin and developer. That must have been really challenging, that period, Stephen.
Yeah, it was certainly not a walk in the park. It was a lot happening at once, and a lot of people asking a lot of questions, and a lot of work that was always getting. I mean, we've always had no shortage of work, so it was it was a change of pace though, which was nice. So
yeah, and I guess the questions would have been coming from a really different angle than your typical BAU questions and challenges too.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, and it was a thought-provoking exercise in that, questions were being asked that, some of them we hadn't actually thought of prior to being asked them, which gave us a little bit of a step back and look at some of the things that we hadn't looked at well enough and let us sort of solidify some of the stuff we did know well.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the journey for you started 10 years prior to when we first met. Cirrus had already been running for 5 years before you joined. Did they specifically hire you to develop the OSS BSS, which was codenamed ATMOS, from scratch, or did Cirrus already have something in place before you arrived?
No, it was, to be honest, I wasn't even actually hired as a developer originally. So the story was that I was actually still at university at the time, and I had a friend who worked for Cirrus as a customer support technician. And they won a contract to do the wireless rollout at Charles Sturt University, and they needed some help drawing RF diagrams, which is basically taking CAD files or scanned maps of buildings and putting them into some software and trying to figure out the optimal placement for wireless access points. So they were kind of just looking for someone to sit at a computer and do some monotonous task, which the time I was like, yeah, sure, why not? Uni students.
Bring that on.
And, maybe I can use this to get past that dreaded, first year out of university tech support, which is most developers are probably aware of the, as you go through uni, there's always that dreaded, you can't get a job unless you have experience, and the only job you can get without experience is, tech support on the phone. So it was definitely a thing on my mind when they offered it. Sort of said, yeah, okay, I can skip some tech support for that, sure. So, and then it was just a case of I was the office that we were working in. We had sort of split at both ends, and there was sort of the executive side, which the CEO and the COO and the CEO were working in the accounting team, and then the other end was sort of the NOC and the customer support and sales guys. And because that end was full, they had me up with the CEO and the COO working on these RF diagrams, and basically I was just in the room when they were sort of talking about their move from a residential to a business grade ISP. They were discussing how they were going to do it, what they needed to do it, and they were talking about making a portal that lets customers sort of access tickets and look at graphing of their services and things like that, and trying to figure out how they were going to do it. And there's me sitting in the corner sort of raising my hand shyly going, I can do that.
Fantastic. Were you already steering towards a career in telco, or it was just opportune that you got to use those dev skills that you've got and apply it to the challenge that was facing Cirrus?
Yeah, definitely just opportune moment. It wasn't really something I would say I was striving towards. Like I've always had an interest in computing and networking as well, but never sort of thought of telco as being the place to sort of move into. It was just, by pure happenstance and being, that guy in the room at the right time that had the right skills. It was a happy coincidence.
Fantastic. And did you already know what an OSS BSS was, and did the uni course that you were doing provide you with many of the skills that were required to really write the telco software straight out of the gate?
I certainly wouldn't say that they gave us much prep for that.
Yeah.
It was we kind of had the groundwork of what skills we would need to be a developer in certain areas, and we certainly had heard the terminology of operational support system and those kind of things, but we hadn't really had that much exposure to building one for certain, or even using them at that stage. We'd only kind of given the documentation side of things that, hey, these things exist. So it was definitely a learn on the job kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm impressed that they even did cover OSS BSS, or the terminology was familiar, because I did a double degree in computer science and engineering, and the closest I would have got to anything OSS BSS or network management related was writing a TCP IP stack, so not even remotely close.
Yeah, I had a very strange degree. I actually started in computer science and ended up doing IT at just a Rimba campus, which is in Gosford. And I think having such a hodgepodge of mixed subjects that we were taking to do them, it gave me a very broad kind of view of the IT world, which is interesting. Yeah,
impressed that it covered over into telco. That's fantastic. And what was the learning curve like in those early days, developing software based on the ideas of the CTO, COO, CEO?
It didn't really change too much from start to when I finished up, but it was certainly hey, we've got this really cool idea. Do you think we can do it? Yeah. So it became a lot easier once the actual application became more grounded in what it was and what it can do, and the things that we could actually manipulate it to do. And I think after a while they also got a little bit more grounded in what they were asking us to do as well, so they weren't sort of trying to get us to reinvent the wheel kind of thing, and utilizing what we'd already had or extending what we've already done into sort of newer functions.
I'm fascinated really with the starting point of what became ATMOS. Was there already a fairly clear roadmap? So you talked about some of the things that you wanted to do, but was that already a multi-year project that waited in store for you from day one when you put your hand up? Or was it more of a case of starting with some of the bits and pieces of ideas and everything else just grew from there?
There certainly has not been a defined roadmap. We've always had a bit of a Kanban kind of backlog of wants and desires and things in the system. But in the early days, it was kind of, I guess you'd think of it more as like a milestone kind of thing, where we sort of said, at this point, we want to be able to do X, Y, and Z. So that might have, and the very first instance was looking at very customer centric kind of features like ticketing and service monitoring and service ordering. So being able to order a service online, have a look at graphing of a particular service, and being able to submit a trouble ticket to say, hey, something's not working, or whatever that might be.
And where were the ideas for those functions really coming from? Were they things that you dreamed up yourself that customers were asking for, or did it just from other research that you were doing?
So a lot of it probably came hand in hand between the network guys and the sales guys asking what they were kind of looking for in tandem with the CEO, which is Eric, sort of bringing those ideas into sort of a cohesive idea. And I think also from just what the customers were really asking from us at those early days, because it really was a case of we were residential completely, and we were sort of looking at the business market, and we had a few customers who had been sort of like, please give us a business service, no one else will, kind of thing. And then, having that early sort of connection with some of those early partners and saying, what is it you want to see? What are the things you'd like to see, or what haven't you seen that you would like to see, kind of thing. And then taking that idea and sort of nurturing it and bringing it into what eventually became ATMOS.
And you talked a little bit about Eric too. He had a fairly strong influence on the shaping of ATMOS too, I believe.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, no, he was... wouldn't be able to give him an actual job title of what he is, but he would be the one that sort of provided some of the more obscure ideas that, a person like me who's had very little exposure to the telco industry would sort of say, "What? Why would you want that?" And then, you sit down, he sort of says, "Well, we want that because of, we want to do this and that, and we want to take A, B, and, minus C, and then we get X, Y, and Z." And you sort of think, "Oh, okay. Yeah, I can see where that could be helpful." So yeah, his background, I believe, is in optics, I think. He had a university degree in optics. And I think he's always been sort of around that sort of telco industry in some way, shape, or form. And I think he had his finger on the pulse of really what people were sort of craving and what we were sort of missing that could sort of get us to those points that people were really craving.
And I'd imagine it was fairly unique to the industry as well, that becoming quite outward-facing and giving the customers a lot more visibility of their services, the health of their services, their usage, all of that kind of thing.
Yeah, it really was. That was one of our very early on decisions, because being the guy that was actually building the system, I got sort of dragged into all of the big high-level meetings and got to sort of be there in the origins of how these things started. And I think that was one of our key differentiator goals, was to be as transparent as possible and really give our customers control of the data that we were seeing, so that, if we were seeing something and not doing anything about it, they could point at us and go, "What are you doing?" Which, most ISPs, even these days, still really don't give anyone that kind of level of data. They kind of will hide it all behind a phone support technician or a ticketing email. And maybe down the track they'll refer to it and say, "Oh yeah, we checked this, and yeah, it is actually bad." We were very upfront at the start, where we said we want to be putting all of this data right in front of a customer, so that if we can't see it and they can, they've got a reason to look at us and say, "Hey, you're not seeing this thing that I'm seeing."
And did you really lead that discussion, so to open the veil, or was it more of the customer was actually driving you to keep the veil open?
In terms of the transparency, I think it was one of those things that someone brought up in one of the meetings, and it was just, everyone kind of nodded their head and went, "Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's what we've got to do." And that's what's going to differentiate us from, your big tier ones like your Telstras and that, which, you have a completely black box sort of service where you have no idea what's going on and you can't sort of see anything yourself. That was where we were going to strive to be very different from everyone else.
And were there certain key customers that really helped drive some of that as well, or just a general discussion with many customers that helped shape it as well?
That's probably one I can't answer. I think there was talks with customers. I just wouldn't be able to tell you who. There were certainly some customers in the early days that were more than happy to give us some feedback and sort of, not so much request features, but sort of suggest ways in which we could help better their offerings to their own customers. Because obviously we were striving to be a business grade sort of service, but we were also looking at sort of that wholesale market. So we were definitely looking at how we could help our wholesale partners actually on-sell the services to their customers and the features they were looking for to give to their customers.
Did you have much of an awareness of other telco management information sources. So I guess the traditional ones that many other in the industry really look out for are TM Forum, back in the old days, ITU, vendor product offerings and the roadshows that they do. Or were you primarily driven and guided by the IT trends, having come from more of that IT-centric background yourself?
Look, I can honestly say I have not heard of any of them, which is probably a bad thing for someone who actually works in the telco industry. But yeah, we certainly, we may have actually looked at some of them at some points in time, but we certainly weren't sort of saying, oh, look at this customer, look at this piece of software and how it does that, and sort of using them as inspiration or anything like that. We were we were sort of relying on our network guys or our sales guys or whoever's using or has used those software to sort of say, it'd be good if our stuff could do this, or this is what we really want to be seeing. And if in those cases, yeah, they might flick us over a piece of software and go, hey, someone showed me this, can we do that with our stuff? And, you know, most of the time we'd say like, yeah, sure. And sort of implement that kind of logic for whatever it was. But those sort of things were not usually sort of big features. It'd be more, they were using a ticketing system that performed function X, and they said, oh, can we make ours do that too? So yeah, no, we're certainly in the dark with what other people were doing. We were definitely sort of more ingrained with what we wanted to do and what we were kind of needing at the time.
Yeah, more driven by customer than necessarily
absolutely
industry. Yeah. And so yeah, that was one thing that came really strongly through to me during that due diligence, is that it seemed you were more aligned with, I guess, the way of the cloud future and initiatives that were happening in the IT industry and the cloud industry, much more so than you were by the outside influences. And as a result, there were a number of interesting innovations that maybe we'll talk about in a little bit more depth later on. So you're no longer at Cirrus, but are you able to tell us a little bit more about Cirrus, their scope, size, products, services?
Yeah, so Cirrus, now known as Swoop, is actually, in the last 18 months, sort of probably the last 6 months before COVID kind of hit, we'd actually just gone through a merger with another company called Anycast. And with Anycast came a retail NBN provider called DCSI. And they're both based in Victoria. And they bumped the size of Cirrus from, I think we were about 20 to 30 people, employees working. And we jumped up to, I think when I ended up leaving, it was about 90 to 100. So it was, a massive jump in just staff working there. Not to mention for Cirrus itself, like the customer base just grew exponentially. Not including some of the other stuff from Anycast. So they had a quite large wholesale networking at the tier 1 level. So they were actually doing like the BGP tier 1 connectivity to other providers. So that was a whole different ballgame that we hadn't even integrated into ATMOS at that stage. But it had just been constantly growing since we first started. So I think when we first started, we were stuck at around 200 to 500 services, and then we got some key partners that shot us off, and that's when we started expanding our teams, and well, my team specifically, and then our teams as the company as a whole, so our network teams and everyone. But we've gone through from offering the most basic layer 3 service, so direct to internet kind of connections, and we also did layer 2 tails, and then we've been adding more sort of flavors to those top end providing products, where we actually are going from just here's your fixed wireless sort of thing. We now got things like Superfast, which is a 500 meg option. So it was 500 meg symmetric fixed wireless installed rapidly within a couple of weeks kind of thing. Way cheaper than what a class license is, and you don't have to sit around and wait for someone to come and install fiber.
And do you think that was even the change in the underlying tech? So it actually blew me away. I'd been a little bit away from the wireless space and the available tech, but the unlicensed spectrum and just the bandwidths that you were able to get, the distances you were able to get, that technology improved leaps and bounds over a fairly short period.
Light years ahead. Every couple of years, it kind of took a big jump ahead. So when I started in 2009, sort of the king of backhauls was the Motorola P2P 400. And I believe those were about $10,000 a unit, give or take. It might even be more. I'm sort of going off figures that I've seen, which might be incorrect, but they were very expensive units.
Yep.
And they were doing 100 meg, 200 meg or something, not overly that much. And then you've got sort of ubiquity backhaul stuff, which even in its first iterations were easily doing that over not the same distance, but comparable distances. So you weren't getting those sort of 40k links or anything like that, but you'd probably get up to 20k and be able to match a P2P 400. And they're doing it for, sub $500.
Yeah, it blew me away, the price point. And I would imagine that suddenly it became a lot more attractive and a lot more cost viable to deliver services. So do you think absolutely. It was just that you were doing, well, the company was really doing an amazing growth, or it was also underpinned by some of that technological improvement?
I think it's a bit of both, yeah, because at the time, I guess, when we were sort of really pushing into that business world, was definitely sort of, around the times the NBN was definitely kind of being talked about, being started to be installed and whatnot, and, towards the end is being installed and being completely delivered. But during those times, it's a bit of an unknown for people, sitting at their office, like, if you've got a business and you're saying, oh, I'll get the NBN when it comes around, but you have no idea when that could be. I mean, I'm sure everyone's had that, you check the NBN Co website and it says, oh, it's going to be installed in January. You come back in January, look at it, and it says, oh, it's actually January 3 years from now. And you're like, wait, what? Did you just get moved? So, yeah, it created a very unique sort of circumstance where, we had this rapidly evolving technology that's increasing in leaps and bounds in terms of the bandwidth we can actually provide customers. We've got a medium that doesn't rely on us digging up roads and that to install it. All we've got to do is put a mast up on your roof, and if we've already got a site in range, then, hey, we can install that within 2 weeks kind of thing. And here's your 100 meg plus internet link or whatever for your business. So it was definitely being in the right opportune moment that, there was this sort of vacuum created by the NBN coming through, and everyone sort of going, oh, NBN's coming, we're not going to invest in rolling out any more of our own stuff until that's sort of resolved. And then we were kind of just like, well, we know that the NBN's missing, what did they end up with? The fixed wireless footprint was like 7 or 9% or something. So there was all of these people that were clearly outside of that initial footprint of getting a fixed line. And then there's the obvious schmoz that happened after with fiber to the node, and people who did getting it, and then they were like, yay, I got 20 meg. So yeah, it was a very sort of unique situation where we were able to sort of swoop in and scrape up the people who'd been missed by that first and second, even third pass of NBN, and provide them with a connection that was probably going to be better and cheaper than what they were going to get anyway.
And I guess to touch on that, so right place, right time, a little bit for the organisation, but also for yourself. I guess I believe that being part of a small team can be a huge advantage when starting a career. So rather than starting with one of the big telcos where there's a little bit of a pigeonholing can potentially happen, but working for a smaller company, I'd imagine that your remit would have rapidly exploded, covering tasks like full stack OSS BSS development, digital transformation, day-to-day sysadmin, data science, process re-engineering. Were you doing all those things, and what else were you doing?
Oh, we're doing that and then some. No, but it is totally true. So, I mean, as I touched on, I think before, when you're going through university, you're not specifically told it, but there's kind of a general understanding as you're going through doing like, a comp sci or IT or whatever it happens to be, that you're not going to walk straight into a job. You're going to walk straight into, a tech support job or something for a little bit, because it's, one of those things that you just don't really get hired unless you've got some sort of experience on your thing. And that, it's a common thing, I think, in probably other industries too, that they won't hire grads unless you're sort of working for those really big guys like IBM or, Google in their grad programs or something like that. And then a lot of the stories you hear are, as you say, you kind of pigeonholed into that. You are coder number 167. And you're not really sort of given the time of day. You're just kind of churning out code for the bigger projects, and you're just sort of a cog in that big machine. So it was definitely an interesting way to sort of get into coding in that sense, because it's definitely not the common path people take to get to guess where I am these days, where I've had the luxury to actually really start at that top level of the stack and be the leader from the start, and actually make a lot of those decisions, like how we were going to build this system, how we're going to run it day to day, what are the systems we're going to use to support us, what do we need to do in order to achieve goal X, Y, and Z, and that's been hugely beneficial across the years. Of just it's an interesting take, because a lot of people tend to start sort of at that bottom of the heap, if you will. And they've got a mentor sitting above them, and you sort of learn from that, and it's been hugely beneficial to sort of be able to strive my own path and make decisions that make sense for what we're doing without sort of without too much hassle of someone saying, but why?
And autonomy of the code base, so not being beholden to anybody else really, or like you said, being a small cog in a big project.
Yeah, it's definitely been a hugely rewarding thing. It's also been one of those great things where, having been there for so long, there is still code, I don't know, in that code base that goes back however many years. But, when you do come across those things and you see them and you go, wow, yeah, look how far I've come.
Like discovering a dinosaur bone.
Yes. And that's where you sort of, wipe your hands, get out of your seat and go for a walk and hope you never come across that code again.
Cover the bone back up again. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, kind of.
Yeah.
And so the responsibilities, I mean, as you say, being the only real member of the team for, it was only 3 years we hired the first staff, so it was a good 7 or 8 years that I was the sole developer building this thing. And, it's you literally are doing everything from start to finish. So, it was, in the early days, it was, I had to go and get the server, go and put the server in the data center. We're installing the software, setting up the VMs and things like that, all the way through to database structure and refactoring first brackets from our form and all of that fun stuff. And those sort of things, if you're in a bigger organization, obviously you have specific people doing those specific roles. But when you're the only guy there, it's you're kind of wearing the hat of many, and setting a lot of these things up. Which it was a fun time, that's for sure, because you definitely learn so much very quickly and out of necessity, really. Yeah, and it's been hugely beneficial to just sort of, not be beholden to, we use this because we use this, where you can actually sort of say, okay, well, we're going to set this up and we're going to look at these 3 different pieces of software and figure out which one's the best for us, and things like that. So we're not sort of, as you say, pigeonholed into doing what we're supposed to do. We're kind of making those choices and picking the best solution for us.
Yeah, really valid point. And I guess because you're covering a really broad estate, and an estate that is really changing rapidly, so just take network virtualization or just virtualization technologies in general would have changed a lot over the time. So all of those kind of things you would have had to have learnt on the fly, had an awareness of what was going on in probably more the IT industry than telco, and then even the refactoring on how to take it from where you were and develop new features, as well as the underpinning stack, all the changes that had to happen with that. So you're wearing multiple hats. What did you enjoy? What were the biggest challenges?
I'm certainly someone who definitely loves to live on, I wouldn't say the cutting edge, but very, very close to the cutting edge. We had the luxury of not really having to stick with what is considered the most stable or what everyone else uses. We were sort of had that sort of freedom to look at the new and emerging stuff and say, can we use this? And that's why we refactored a few times to sort of take advantage of some of those cutting edge tools that were coming out. And, they were, in the long run, hugely rewarding for us, because we weren't sort of sitting there trying to maintain this old dying code base of code that no one wants to work on. We were sitting, right close to that bleeding edge of what people want to be coding with. And when we actually expanded our team to 5 or 6 people before I finished up, we had people that were really kind of pushing to come and work for us, because we were using such an interesting stack that, just hadn't really been adopted in many of the larger companies yet. And as you say, yeah, finding some of those finding those things that you really don't know about when you start. So the things that I remember was the biggest learning curve for me was VM virtualization. We've all used a server before, but in those days, this is back in the late 2000s. Having never really heard of a VM host or a VMware and how they provide their hosting and learning how these containerization sort of things work in the world before Docker was a steep learning curve, but I think it ended up being quite beneficial because a lot of those things that I've learnt in that stage have now completely been passed on to technologies like Docker and OpenVZ and things that have just made everyone's life that much easier across the board.
It would have changed your whole release train and your whole way of... So you talked about stability earlier on, and so you would have been almost on a daily basis, I assume, adding to the code base and adding new features and functions, but also trying to drip feed that into a production system. I guess that whole release train must have changed so much, and the way that you develop and release and test code must have changed a lot too.
Surprisingly, not really. So very early on, one of the things that I was a big follower of was a completely automated CI/CD pipeline, which in those days was, it was kind of a buzzword and people were sort of saying, yeah, you should do it, but, if you don't have a big enough thing, then it's not worth it. But I was kind of a firm believer of automated testing and automated deployment, just because... you don't want to have a whole bunch of code sitting there to be deployed and you have to do it after hours. So, you're constantly up at, midnight or something, deploying code to a bunch of servers just to minimize your downtime. So, yeah, one of the things I put in very early on was some zero downtime deployment tools and a full offsite testing and integration platform. So basically, anytime we pushed some code, it would run it through automated testing end to end, and then assuming it passed that testing, it would push into production. So it would go straight in without having to go through a lot of that paperwork steps. And yeah, that definitely pushed our velocity that much higher with getting features and stuff into production quicker.
Very insightful to do that in the early days, because I would imagine that would be really, really hard to retrofit into a large code base.
It's definitely become a lot easier these days with things like Docker becoming that much more prevalent anywhere. But yeah, back in those days, it was the people who were doing, those sort of VM on the fly kind of tools that were building an isolated contained environment was very kind of niche. And yeah, it definitely was. I'm not sure why I was such a stickler for it, but it was definitely something I pushed for. And it was, hugely just made things that much easier for us in the long run. Having things just testing automatically and, it failed. Okay, why did it fail? Catching it before it gets into production, break stuff, and not having to actually go on and manually intervene with all these things. They just kind of flow one to the other. It was, it saved us that much time and that much effort and probably that many errors as well that it was, easily paid for itself. No brainer.
Yeah, and I guess too, because being a relatively small team, you wouldn't have had the time to be constantly testing and checking. So again, insightful to do the automated test stack.
Yes, that was actually probably the one thing I didn't touch on, was because we were such a small team, it was one of those things that I think Bill Gates said it ages and ages ago was, you always hire a lazy person because they'll find the easiest way to solve something. And, you do things enough times, like deploying code onto a server, and quite quickly that became one of my, this needs to die. So, yes, it was, because it was basically only affecting me at the time, it was like, this is annoying me, I'm going to fix it.
Yeah.
And then, it's actually, that system, I think, it's still in use, unless it's changed recently. But that's how good it was in those days. It just fixed so many issues for us that it was a no-brainer.
And you call yourself a full-stack developer. So, interestingly, I guess your connotation of full-stack and mine are possibly a little bit different, but overlapping, but certainly equally challenging. So, when I talk about full-stack in the context of OSS BSS, I'm talking about the many features, functions, whereas I guess when you finished there recently, what functionality did ATMOS cover at a high level across that functionality full stack? So I'd imagine service orders, activation, inventory, assurance, network management, etc., etc. Are you able to give us a little bit of a rundown of what your full stack OSS BSS is?
You're going to be testing my brain because there's quite a lot. So I'll start with the service stuff. So we had from the get-go of an order process, we had the service qualification through to service ordering, through to service provisioning, and then service handoff of a service, and then into service billing. We also had ticketing, so ticketing support system for managing errors on the services and whatnot if customers were putting stuff in. We had service assurance and monitoring, so we had our monitoring system that was collecting multiple streams of data from the devices we were using at the customer's end. And then we were funneling all of that data into our assurance and analytics platform that was actually reviewing the day's data and actually comparing it against previous data sets we've got from those devices to sort of identify devices that were either not performing as well as they should or that should be performing better. Then we also had our site management, which managed our transmission sites all around Australia and our storage sites all around Australia. And we also had our stock and inventory management, which was keeping track of what stock we had where and what stock we had sitting in warehouses and whatnot. We had an invoice management system that was working as a purchase order system for our vendors. So we were purchasing stock through the ATMOS system. We also had our sort of item and I mentioned stock inventory. We also had a stock and item management. So we had a series of stock item types that we had in the system that we supported at any time, and sort of how we were supposed to monitor those devices and any sort of metadata that went with that. So like the MIB data of what we needed to monitor, those sort of things that we were keeping as well.
So it's a pretty impressive. It is a pretty full stack that you've got there that you developed.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm missing a few things. We had the job system and the work order management. So we were managing the work orders. The workers out in the field, whether they're internal or subcontracted, and we also had
workflow engine.
Yes, thank you. That was I said it in my head and I forgot. Yeah, we had our workflow engine. So that was really sort of taking a lot of that first level sort of tech stuff and automating a lot of that so we could get to a resolution quicker on trouble tickets. And then we also had account management, customer management, and contact management, all those kind of things. And we had a outage management system as well. So when we had outages affecting either a piece of stock on a site or a whole site, we actually were able to figure out which customers were affected by that, by what radios they connect to, and only really inform customers who were affected by outages that they were having an outage, and we weren't sort of blasting everyone saying, hey, there's an outage in a state you're not in.
And so that was all highly automated as well, the whole notification process.
Oh yeah. No, that was actually one of the very early on features that has probably survived relatively untouched over the 10-year period, purely because it's one of those, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And it was just one of those things. Like we went through some design changes on the emails we sent out, but for the most part, that system has remained relatively untouched.
Clearly, if it's remained untouched, it's been fairly bulletproof. I found looking at similar concepts in the past.
Yes, which is one of those very key things that you must have in a system like this that's definitely customer facing is resilience in the face of very challenging circumstances. Redundancy and your fault tolerance have to be second nature, and that high availability needs to be very high availability.
And I guess with so much coverage, so much functionality to build, as well as doing the daily sysadmin tasks, I'm assuming that your role would have been really a case of drinking from the fire hose. And if that's true, what were the kind of techniques that you might have developed to prioritize what was an infinite to-do list that it unfortunately just seems to come with the territory when you're an OSS implementer or owner or product developer?
Yeah, it's kind of like a reverse keg stand kind of thing, where without the added effects at the end. So drinking from the fire hose, it's a very apt analogy. It was definitely there was never a dull day. So whenever we sort of I wouldn't say we were putting out fires that often, but occasionally you'd have something would break and you'd have to fix it. So that all came into account on the day to day. And thankfully, as we moved to Amazon, most of the sysadmin stuff became less and less sort of day-to-day and kind of became a instead of a once a day checking on things, or once a week, it's become, once a month maybe. And just doing things like, package updates at the OS level and stuff like that. Very, very simple things. And leaving a lot of the rest of the heavy lifting to AWS to really handle the the core stuff that you really don't want to be worrying about as a developer.
Oh, really interesting. And one of the things I used to love, particularly in the early days, is the to-do list was infinite, and it was I could almost choose any given day. Okay, I feel like doing this today, because I knew there were so many things that we just had to move forward that you could almost pick and choose. All right, we'll work on this one because it'll still move the project forward, or we'll do this one. But perhaps you were a bit more coordinated in your prioritization of tasks.
Oh, absolutely not. No. we had a bit of a tradition at Cirrus that then became Swoop, and I think they're still doing it, but it's a little bit harder because I wasn't actually ever attendance of a Swoop Christmas party where everyone was together, because we merged with our Anycast brethren, and then we had COVID, so we had a disjointed Christmas party last year. But up to that, we had one of our staff would do an awards ceremony for everyone and give everyone sort of funny nicknames. And I think 2 years running, I was Stephen the List White, and my catchphrase had become, "Have you seen how long my list is?" Because there was a point at which someone actually printed out the list that I'd had of people just sort of putting requests for features in, and I think it was about 3 pages long or something. It was ridiculously long. Yeah. Stuck it onto my desk one day when I came in and was like, "Haha, who's the prankster?" And so we certainly definitely also had the concept of that infinite list, because it's that whole Hydra kind of thing. If you knock one head off and 6 more take its place, kind of thing. We, I guess, tried to, as best we could, ignore the fact that we had so much work sitting there, and would focus on what the company was really screaming for first. So there would always be, if you've got a list of 400 items or something, there's probably only 10 in there that the company's really saying, we need this yesterday kind of thing. Can we have this before everything else? And that was, you'd stick around those sort of really high-level priorities that everyone's really sort of striving for. And then sort of fit in, your day-to-day business as usual, bug fixing and stuff around that.
And I guess focusing on the stuff that really moved the needle, rather than just the nice fluffy change the colour on a GUI kind of thing.
Those were the best tasks, though. You knock a few of them out and you feel really accomplished when you knock off 10 tasks in a day.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's loop back around to the second part of full stack. So tell me more about your definition of full stack and why it's so important, particularly in an OSS BSS telco dev environment.
Yeah, well, I guess the job description of a full stack is essentially someone who can work in the front end or the back end without sort of, I guess, having to go away and learn stuff. They're kind of comfortable working at either end. My personal definition of a full stack is basically someone who is able to be exposed to any part of the stack, whether it be the OS level, even, to some degree, the hardware level of what they're running on, all the way through to, the request coming into the web server kind of thing. So being able to actually work with the data coming in, how it's actually getting processed and responding to it, whether it be from the front end as an API call to the back end or whatever. And that was actually key to us in a lot of places, because we hired full stack developers just so that we could actually do that. We could actually give them some of these larger projects, and we could say, here's a project for you to own. Let me know if you have any problems, kind of thing.
Come back in a month and show us how it works. Yeah, come back
in a month and see how you're going, kind of thing. But without having to sort of sit there and handhold them and say, okay, this is how this works, or we'll get Brian to go and do the front end, we'll get James to go and do the back end, and then we'll get this person to come and do the testing. It was really key to us being able to put the right kind of expertise in the right places without having too much overhead. And that's really one of the key things that kind of let us stay as such a small team for so long. Because we even at our highest number, we were dealing with 5-6 people, and we were doing with 5-6 people, even with 2 people for most of the time. Like, we only had 5-6 people for 6 to 8 months probably. So before that, we're talking 11 years. We're working with just upwards of 2 people, and we're ticking boxes and doing things like what other telcos even are doing with teams of 20 developers. So yeah, it's definitely key for us in sort of keeping those overheads of having to sort of pass things back and forth between people by having full stack engineers instead of a front end and a back end and things like that, and kept our need to sort of expand that team relatively small.
I guess also mid-flight, you really pivoted the ATMOS stack to be really cloud native when there'd already been quite a lot of functionality built. How big a refactoring effort was that? And maybe if you could explain a little bit about what went into, maybe there was more than one, maybe there were a few pivots and major refactoring efforts.
There definitely was, and that was certainly one of them. I think I kept a very loose versioning scheme with ATMOS that we had, and we had versions. One was sort of our prototype. 2 was what we were running with for the customers for a while, and then version 3 was our first big refactor, and that was when version 2 basically became so full of technical debt of just how it was created that it was getting to the point where you made a change one place, you'd have to go and change 6 other places just to make it work. So when we were looking at what was coming next, we kind of said, hey, let's take a step back and look at what we can do to sort of help this environment move a little better for us as devs, which of course is me talking to myself. And I was looking around at what things can I use to sort of speed up this process where I'm not sort of treading on my own feet, breaking stuff every 5 seconds. And that was where we looked at a framework called Laravel, and it was rated as this magical PHP framework that was no one had ever heard of, and it was breaking boundaries. And I was like, yeah, okay, whatever.
Mythical unicorn thing, yeah.
Yeah, the mythical sort of unicorn coming in and saving the day. And I didn't believe any of it, and I was looking around going, okay, there's got to be something else. And then eventually I kind of just said, okay, I'm going to look at it. I'm going to install it, and I'm going to see what it does. And read through the documentation and started looking at it, and it really did. It was that much more consistent across the board and sort of provided so much out of the box functionality that we just then didn't have to go and engineer ourselves and maintain ourselves. Things like security of a login system and database parametering was all sort of native out of the box. You didn't have to handle it yourself and build your own custom endpoints to sort of do these specific things. And even in those days, the amount of routes that we had that we were serving to the front end was, it was way too high, but was something we needed to condense down. So that was our big refactor, and that was converting our sort of procedural-based PHP app to Laravel framework. And it was, I think the whole thing ended up taking about 6 months, and the first part was about 2 months of just crunching out the customer-facing utilities and things that the customers use. And then we sort of put that live, and we ran sort of the old system and the new system in parallel while we migrated sort of the remaining staff-only functions into the new system. And the whole thing was about 6 months, I think it was. It was it was a stressful time, that one, but the end result was astronomically improved for just everyone who worked on it. Even when we started hiring more devs, and they were kind of just like, wow, this is great. I've never heard of Laravel, but I want to use it more. And,
so I'm fascinated too about the parallelism. How did you get that to work?
Well, we were actually kind of lucky in that sense, because we actually were able to share the same backend database, and we had already extracted that database to its own server. So we were able to sort of share that one database from these multiple endpoints that were basically producing various different front ends, and the smarts and the integration of the back end that made it work that much better. So it was just as we moved stuff over from the old system to the new system, we just discontinued that in the old system. And that really gave us so much functionality out of the box that we hadn't actually really started to consider using AWS for anything. And a lot of the out-of-the-box stuff that Laravel supports is a lot of the first-party AWS features, like SQS and SES, Simple Email Service. And the big one, of course, S3, cheap data storage. Cheap, massively cheap data source. And that, once we finished refactoring that down to the Laravel framework, we were looking, well, yeah, we'd already started using some of those AWS functions because we were like, well, let's start using these. They look really cool. And that started opening up the world to us of asynchronous job processing and highly secure login systems and things like that. And yeah, things like the asynchronous job processing, it meant we didn't have to lock up the front end when we were doing all these requests as much. So, you know, when people click on things, we're not sitting there having them wait for a loading screen. You know, we're giving them an instant response and letting it process this tremendous amount of data in the back end and then just emailing the results or whatever it might be. So we'd started on that already. And then I think during that time, we were looking at replacing our aging hardware. That was when we really started looking at AWS seriously and going, well, why don't we look at a cloud provider and look at that sort of pay per month model instead of, you know, buying new servers and hardware and having to go put them in our data center and et cetera,
and all the support of the infra. Yeah,
exactly. And having, you know, someone to actually maintain them, and we've got to monitor them and replace aging parts like RAM and hard drives when they break and stuff like that. So at that point, we'd actually started on a bit of a feasibility study to say, you know, is using something like Amazon not so much cheaper for us, but better for us in the long run, especially being, you know, a single person team. It was kind of like, if we can pay a little more and offload a bunch of this stuff that I'm doing on the regular, then it frees me up to do a whole bunch of other stuff. So the cost was, I think when we were looking at it, was not too much more than what we were looking at buying servers. But the overhead of upkeep of things, so, you know, maintaining licensing and all of those fun things that you take for granted that I guess just happened by, you know, someone else might be managing it or what happened. It was definitely sort of deemed it was a cost well spent in the early days. But while we were actually in the middle of the feasibility study, we had a problem at the ISP where we had an outage in our core network, and what that actually meant was, not only could our internal staff or our internal customers talk to ATMOS, the external customers and staff couldn't talk through the internet to ATMOS, and it couldn't actually talk to its redundant servers and fault-tolerant servers and everything, and it caused this massive chaos of just all of our data's locked in this system that we now can't access because this core network's having an issue. So we couldn't see things like how to access certain sites because we had site codes in there. We had we couldn't notify customers that this outage was going on, and you know, all these really sort of horrible things you don't want to be dealing with when you're already dealing with a big outage. Yeah, so it was part of when we sort of reviewed what actually happened and looked at some of the things that we can fix. Yeah, the post-mortem, thank you. We were sort of saying, well, this can't happen again. We need this system to be up, you know, 24/7, 365. And that was when we really sort of started taking a look at and going, okay, well, what's it going to take to build a completely redundant, highly available system in our own data center? And, you know, we had all of these pricings done for, you know, getting our own SANs, getting multiple servers, getting failover licensing, getting dark fiber between our data centers and a separate link so that we could have those two talking to each other, getting their own out-of-band networking. It was this huge shopping list of things we'd have to do. And then we sort of just said, well, why aren't we just using Amazon? Why we don't need this stuff to be on our network. We can utilize these hyperscale public clouds to do what we're talking about and get so much more benefit out of it. And the benefit is not stopping at the network side. It means if we have a problem, this system's always running in the cloud. And you know, at that point just became, there's no way we're not doing it now. And it was definitely one of those never look back moments where you know, once we were on that cloud, it was just, yeah, we're not developing anything more on local servers anymore. And yeah, we've been basically cloud native on a lot of those things ever since then. And yeah, I don't think we've had a single issue in the whole time, because obviously there was one issue with Amazon a few years back when a data center got flooded, but obviously if most people who were affected by that didn't have proper high availability set up. And yeah, they suffered some pretty big outages, but yeah, we've always been from the very start fully highly available, fully scaling everything, and yeah, we've had no outages, maybe a database crash over 6 years, and it automatically reboots in a couple of seconds. So it's been absolutely worth every penny we've spent in just not having to manage those day-to-day things. and really sort of changed our whole way of thinking of how we build these things and how we actually structure these applications now to take full advantage of what the cloud is really offering us.
And it sounded almost like Laravel almost took you on the first step of that journey. Do you think you still would have got to the same outcome if not choosing that tool?
I don't think we would have got there as quick. That's for certain, yeah, because we definitely were already looking at Amazon for some of the tools that they were providing. And then it was, the logical next step is, well, you've got some things in there, why don't you look at what else you can do? And Laravel really pushed us towards that just because of how integrated it was with a lot of those tools just straight out of the box. And I think certainly we probably would have got there in the end, however we got, whatever framework we ended up using, because these days it's the logical sort of, why wouldn't you put a public-facing website and some sort of cloud provider and let them sort of handle the heavy lifting of traffic and those sort of things? But it certainly wouldn't have happened as fast if we hadn't sort of jumped on that Laravel bandwagon when we did.
It seems amazing to me too that you've gone down the journey of developing an OSS BSS from scratch, homegrown. There must be so many pros, but also cons related to that. So to me, it seems like the pros would be you get the near ideal fit, that you get to completely control the use cases that you're developing for and the requirements. The cons being you become fully responsible to develop and fix everything. Are you able to describe why you went the homegrown path, and maybe did you ever consider using any off-the-shelf existing tools?
I think in the first instance, one of the biggest things we were trying to solve was collecting monitoring device data from some devices that really didn't fit into any other system. So we've always been fairly agnostic with what hardware we use out in the field. And part of that is obviously you find technology that can do things really well, but they also do some things really badly. And back in the days, I think when we were first starting, one of the problems was the access points and CPEs we were using really didn't have support for SNMP, which is kind of a bit of a problem when you're trying to monitor something. And one of the very first things we were trying to do was to get some of that data off those devices and figuring out how to do it. And that was kind of gave birth to our monitoring system called BizMon, which we've since kind of retired because other tools have kind of caught up and really picked up a lot of that agnostic approach to network monitoring. Whereas back then, the tools that were really available were things like Cacti and they work and they'll give you some pretty graphs and things, but to do the level of sort of data analytics that we really wanted to be doing, it wasn't giving us the level of data we wanted. And that really drove us to sort of push our own monitoring system so that we could pull all this data into a single database and really drill down into some of the analytics of how these devices were performing. And that was where we first started. And that was why we really didn't sort of push into what some of the vendors were really offering. And that was, that's why we went down the path of starting our own thing. And I think there were definitely a few points along the path where we kind of stopped and took a look at what other people were doing and sort of saying, is this the right decision to be keep going down this path? And I think we always kind of had that 50-50 split of, is it the right thing? Is it the wrong thing? But I think we always ended up on the side of we're getting so much better use out of our own system that we've built rather than trying to migrate everything and losing some of the functions we probably rely on a day-to-day basis in favor of having a little more structure with what other people are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of felt like that mid-market isn't necessarily all that well served for the ideal needs of what you have. So, like you said, there's some things that are done really well for that market and others that are kind of missed as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So I guess while I talked about not really using much in the way of commercial off-the-shelf OSS BSS, you still have used quite a bit of off-the-shelf capability, but more in the IT stack, haven't you? Like the Redis and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't say we've gone full open source, but we definitely took advantage of so much open source stuff that has just made our life that much easier. As you said, Redis provides our full caching stack on the front end. Obviously, we've got MySQL database backends. And going through the initial days before we were actually in the cloud, when we had our own database stacks that we were running, and we had Pacona, extra DB clusters running Galera, which was a fun time for everyone. And we were dealing with a lot of interesting kind of database setups like multi-master databasing, just so that we could have that high availability and fault tolerance across the board. And a lot of the tools that we were using to support that were, those open source, off the shelf kind of things that, really kind of kept us going until we got to a point where it was just no longer really suitable for what we were doing. And then once we moved into Amazon, a lot of those functions are just baked in, things like having a fault-tolerant database. You don't start up 2 databases anymore. You just check a box that says make this multi-AZ, and it's kind of all handled for you.
Okay, brilliant. And over the years, have you spent much time talking with others in the industry? So did many vendors come knocking on your door? Did you get the chance to go to many events where other carriers and ISPs were really coming together as well? Or maybe any other thought leaders or disruptors that you really got the chance to talk with?
Not really to us, actually. It's interesting that we hadn't, but we've talked to a whole bunch of vendors about what they can offer us, but not necessarily with them sort of, I guess, asking what we were doing and how we were doing it. And those talks were usually not something I would have ever been involved in, because I'd be too busy in the trenches fixing up some code or something. Probably the only time I ever talked to a vendor was when I was going to the Amazon conferences. They were very insistent that I came after we started using them.
And did they ever get you to present as a case study?
No. No. We've engaged them a couple of times for some solutions architect help, but no, nothing more than that, really.
And so it's been really interesting that you have really developed a solution outside the telco bubble, not necessarily the tech bubble, but the telco bubble. And in many ways, that's probably allowed you to innovate in ways I personally haven't seen across other OSS BSS. So I recently wrote a blog about Seth Godin's Purple Cow, a product concept where the novelty of a purple cow has some real wow factor, and that Seth suggests that you should really build that into every product to ensure that it receives the word of mouth. For me, there were 3 wow moments from ATMOS when I first saw it, and 3 distinct purple cows that really got my attention. So one was really the line of sight tool that you use to assist with remote service qualification. Another one was the user mimic function, how to replicate what each user was really experiencing, the real user experience. So not having to talk to somebody about, what does your account do? That's not what I'm expecting to do, but actually being able to pick up their account and mimic it. And I guess just having, particularly for the mid-market, having the forethought to develop that workflow engine rather than hard-coding everything specific to your processes. Were those innovations that you had seen elsewhere, or was that real original thinking by you and the team?
So the line of sight tool actually wasn't originally our idea. It was one we actually saw Ubiquiti had, and it was a product they had online called AirLink, I think it was.
Okay.
And it was built around Google Earth, and it did a really good job of demonstrating how that line of sight would look in 3-dimensional space. But it didn't really work for us being able to do as an API kind of thing, like request these 2 locations and do a line of sight check. So that was where we kind of took inspiration from what they'd done and built our own one using a different sort of data source and sort of stepping away from that Google Earth data because of the technical constraints of either having to get a client boot up Google Earth in their browser or actually getting them to go offline, perform it, and back upload it was not something we could really ask a customer to do, as we want it to be really simple. So we kind of took what we learnt from how they were doing it and applied that to what we know with how we do our sort of line of sight checks. And that's where we came up with our first sort of generation of the line of sight tool, which has gone through very many iterations on how it operates and how accurate it is and the confidence we have in it. But it's definitely become key to us expanding, being able to not sort of have to rely on sending people out to look at things before we install and having a very, very good idea before they get there. The user
that must
mimic
be
one,
a really high percentage as well. The reliability of SQ would be so much higher than doing it via other mechanisms, I assume.
Yeah, we when we first started, our confidence in it was not great, and we'd have a lot of the times they would submit an SQ, and then either the customer or the sales rep would sort of come back and say, "I don't think this is right." And there are more modern versions of it. I don't think I ever had someone question its results because of just how much better either the data set we were getting to actually do the test we had gotten that much better, or just the way we were actually interpreting the data and providing more broad and accurate results that we could condense down into a really highly confident rating of what we could do. It just made it, takes away a lot of those manual processes that then you don't have to do.
Well, and takes away site visits just for SQ.
Yeah, you leave them to the really complex ones where someone is desperately needing internet and like, oh, it says no, but I really need it. And, we always allowed people, even if our automated coverage checker said, no, you can't get a service, but you could still order it. And then we would then do a manual check and have either someone look at it manually through Google Earth or something like that, or we'd actually get someone to drive out and drop by with a drone or something and do a quick flyby and really see if the line of sight was as blocked as we thought. Yeah. And that's, some of the other ones. The workflow engine, that was all Eric's kind of, Eric's love child there. He definitely put a lot of thought into some of the stuff he does, which is really sort of drilling down into what the process is that people follow when they're doing things. So taking real sort of information from how they're actually doing certain jobs and then translating it down into flowcharts and things. And then the next logical step from that was to build a system that could actually utilize and take that flowchart data and really provide it into some sort of useful mechanism. And that was born out of necessity, that one. I don't think we'd actually seen it anywhere before. But it became really key to some of our processes. But the user mimic function, which we called masquerading, that was born out of my own annoyance with people always submitting bugs to me and saying, hey, I went and did this and this happened, and you'd go and do it on your account, and you'd be like, oh, it's fine. And then you'd like masquerade as that user and go do it and be like, oh actually. Because there's definitely more than enough times where that happened and it kind of became something that was just kind of like, well, what if I just built something that did this?
Oh, it's a brilliant insight because it just makes so much sense in hindsight.
Oh no, it saved us a lot of those passive aggressive emails being like, I can't see what you're seeing, send me a screenshot or any of that, read the manual sort of thing. But when we can actually just log in as them. And I should mention, log in as them without their username or password. All of that was always secured from us. It was always, it was a process that happened on the back end that made the system believe you were that person without actually having access to their data. But it made it that much easier when it came to diagnosing some of these complex issues that really were specific to one person or even one browser.
It comes through that you're probably more passionate about the development side than the OSS and Telco per se. That's just been a vehicle for you to really drive your development experiences. Do you spend much time really thinking about the world of OSS and Telco and where it's going to go in the future, particularly for the mid-market ISPs like you were serving?
I guess over the years I have. I think one of the key things that I think is really going to drive the market in probably I'm not sure what the time frame would be, but that's going to come down to transparency, which is something that we strive for in the early days of just trying to be as open and honest with our customers. And I haven't seen many other ISPs do it. My personal one at home, residential one's Aussie Broadband, and they're fantastic with really sort of laying it out in front of you. They give you graphing of their point of interconnect, so you can actually see when their POIs are being contended. You're not getting your full speed and things like that. And I really think that is a trend that's going to continue, that the ISPs are really going to not be forced to, but are going to sort of join that bandwagon of being really open and transparent with their customers about what they're actually buying, and really get into that customer satisfaction and assurance of what they're actually buying is what they're getting. And some of the other ones, I think, which it's probably ones that I think everyone are very familiar with, that, you know, everyone's going to be moving to the cloud, and will definitely leave having sort of their own data centers in their offices and their own racks full of servers as a thing of the past. So I think there's going to be a lot more interconnecting back into those core data centers where our cloud hyperscalers are, you know, your Amazon Azure, Google Cloud, and AWS.
Do the LEO satellite players like Starlink pose a significant threat to the fixed wireless operators like Swoop, do you think?
There's definitely, I guess this is a very hotly contended subject, because it definitely came up a few times in the office. There's definitely a 50-50 split on that one, that people were like, oh, we're in trouble. And the other side of people saying like, nah, it's a different market, don't worry about it. But I think it's something that we will have to we can't ignore. It's coming. And I think we need to sort of look at what those markets are that they're going to be really striving to get, and where they actually sit as an offering to customers, and really sort of figuring out what part of the mix is going to be part of that, you know, Starlink, LEO satellites, and what part is going to be fixed wireless, and what, you know, the rest that's going to be a fixed line or an optic fiber kind of thing. And finding out what the markets are that really need one or the other, or if indeed it actually is a complete mix that people want. I know for a fact that we've had quite a few customers that necessarily don't need fixed wireless across all of their sites that they were trying to get connected, but were definitely just happy to have all of their sites connected by one provider, so that they didn't have to deal with this provider for this office, this provider for that office, and another provider for this. So I think there's the aggregators are really going to be the ones that stand out in those fields, as long as the fixed wireless and the LEO satellites are able to sort of wholesale to those those aggregators. But yeah, no, they play an important mix, I think, and I think there's definitely always going to be people that really are in the middle of nowhere that are going to hugely benefit from having anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things that amazes me about the hyperscaler marketplace is just the never-ending supply of additional functions that seem to keep popping up. Are there any new ones? So obviously you were fairly early to use some of those tools. Are there any new ones that are popping up that you think hold great promise for managing service provider networks?
Well, definitely on the web side of things, serverless deployments are just, they're so good. I've had a lot of, we've actually, we're rebuilding ATMOS as a almost another refactor before I finished up into a completely serverless environment. And it's one of those things that is a trend that everyone's been saying is buzzword for however many years, but I think it's one of those trends that's definitely here to stay. It fixes a lot of the issues that people have, and really opens up the world of scale to such a wide degree that it's unavoidable. And, you know, even on the managed service side of things, I haven't actually looked into them too much, but I have seen that there are now providers starting to pop up that will actually provide cloud-based networking. So it's kind of core router as a service kind of thing. And they're using those public cloud instances to actually provide that, which is, it's just so cool to think about. Like, you don't even need the hardware in your in your data center anymore. You just connect into the public cloud and off you go.
Yeah, you're not waiting on blocked up shipments coming from China, like at the moment, for example.
Exactly. Yeah, and next time you need to upgrade, you just go in and change your instance size, and bam, you've gone from 1 gig to 10 gig core routing kind of thing. Like, it's an interesting world that, because you don't have that sort of locked in ownership of what you're buying, and you're so flexible of what you can actually change to, it opens up so much more possibilities.
Have you dabbled much in, say, the AI or machine learning type tools that are now on offer as well?
I've dabbled them, but not in too much detail. We did look at one at one point to augment our ticketing system. So we were able to, we were looking at trying to take the device data when like a trouble ticket came in, and taking the device data and what they actually had provided us in the description and sort of a pre-form fill out before the ticket gets supported, to try and have like a quick resolution either provided to our own support techs that could then, you know, on pass that on to the customer, or to actually self-resolve the entire ticket straight away. We kind of started looking at that, but I can't remember why we stopped. I think it was just one of those, we didn't really have a good time frame. It was kind of just research at that point, and we didn't really have a good answer to it. It's an interesting field that is again, it's like serverless. It's going to be one of those things that isn't going anywhere, and it is going to provide weird and interesting feedback that most humans just won't get when they look at things. Like we're very good at pattern matching, but it's good at just sucking down a whole bunch of data and spitting out you know, an answer. And that's where we were attempting to sort of use it.
Yeah, and fascinating to think that you were looking at it to an extent, an automated guidance or notification about what the problem might be, all the way through to customers, and not just the ops guys. That itself is taking visibility to a whole new level.
That was kind of the key, is that we wanted to put customers onto our own staff where we couldn't just give them an answer straight away. So if they gave us a ticket, it was something, you know, someone's going to have to log into their router or something and do some troubleshooting, log into this, check their graphs, etc. And we could do all that straight away up front before they've even looked at it, and give them a response, you know, within 5 minutes kind of thing. I mean, how good does that look to a customer?
Proactive notification to a whole new level, compared to most faults are actually found by the customer before they're ever found in other service provider solutions.
Well, that was kind of the key, was, you know, we'd be able to have someone email us or lodge a ticket online and hopefully have a resolution to their problem sort of before you even got off hold on some of the other providers.
Yeah, absolutely. Fascinating. So I guess we took a little bit of a look forward there. And so now, looking back, if you could go back to when you first started building ATMOS and provide some mentorship to yourself from what you know now, what would you pass on? Insights, methodologies?
Oh, that's a tough one. I would say better planning. and probably, while we never actually really had a roadmap per se, it would have been definitely advantageous for us to sort of sit down and look at not so much what was coming up, but how long, you know, looking 6 months in the future rather than sort of the next 10 things. Or even further in some of those cases for those larger projects where, you know, you're not just sort of bashing it out in a couple of days or a week or something. You're spending 3 months on them. And some of those ones that, you know, we get, they're so big, and you get to the end of it, and then, you know, 6 months down the track, you're either adding more features onto it or adding a completely different system that actually connects to it. And a lot of those times we would never really think too much about what possibly could utilize that data. And we'd have to go back through and do some, you know, migration of the data and change some database fields and whatnot to sort of support that new system we were creating. So yeah, I think definitely roadmaps are at a high level useful. As I said, I do kind of like the concept of them, but I don't like the strictness of it. You know, here's your roadmap, you're sticking directly to that, and that's all you're doing. And I guess the other thing is, don't be afraid to jump on what is new and what is hot, because at the end of the day, you've got to be coding it, right? So if you don't like what you're coding, you're not gonna do well at it. And yeah, that's certainly something, a lesson I've learned is, you know, don't be afraid to look at options. If there's something that is of benefit to yourself or to the group as a whole, and it's something like, you know, changing a technology stack to something else, you know, there's benefits that are unseen and non-tangible that can really weigh things in the right direction. Things like actually, you know, looking forward to working on something. It boosts productivity massively. If you're getting up and working on something that you hate, it's just like, oh, this is boring. You know, you're going to take longer doing things. You're not going to enjoy it. And it's all those other things that you forget about that you're really not doing. You're like, if you hate something, you're not going to be sitting there commenting it, doing that. You're not going to try and make the code formatted really cool. You're just going to be like, I just want to get done, finish it, and, you know, save, push, and done. But if it's something you really enjoy and you're really kind of living what you're doing, it's, yeah, definitely something that is a definite piece of advice is make sure it is something you're doing that you enjoy doing. So if it means talking to someone about pivoting a tech stack or something, have the conversation.
I guess it's a case too of their hot technologies for a reason, that they are making a difference for people. That's the reason they're hot. Assuming
absolutely.
It's not just marketing hotness, but it's actual real user experience.
Oh, absolutely. I'm one of the biggest sufferers of that myself, because you've probably heard of GraphQL before, and I was a big non-believer of GraphQL and was just like, it's just different REST. What problems does this fix? And, I was totally against it for so long. And when would it have been? About 6 months ago, we were mid-rebuilding. Well, no, actually, we just started rebuilding into our new UI for ATMOS. And it was something we looked at briefly and sort of said, hang on, this fixes a lot of the issues we're currently dealing with. Why don't I have a look at what this actually is? And, did a bit of research, and now I'm complete convert. That's definitely, if you're not keeping an attention of what is happening in the cutting edge, it's going to go past you, and whatever. You got to keep an open mind to everything.
And speaking of keeping an open mind, so after leaving Cirrus, you're now looking for the next big step in the career journey. Hopefully there are some potential employers listening to the podcast. What type of employer or what type of role would you be a really good fit for, or what have you got your eyes on for the next step in the career journey?
Yeah, so I've actually been enjoying my my long service leave and having a good break since I finished Cirrus. So I'm starting to get back into the swing of things and getting all the bits and pieces ready to join back into the workforce. I think personally I'm probably looking for a similar sort of position to what I had at Cirrus, a very sort of everyman kind of person, small kind of startup-y kind of place, and to bring that wide breadth of knowledge into various different things. So it's not just very linear of what I'm going to be doing. I think I've grown to sort of enjoy that turning up to work and having no idea what I'm actually going to be doing that day, even if it is documented what I'm supposed to be doing. It's I would say I'm sort of looking at everything at the moment, and I'm actually in a rare position where I've got a bit of luxury to sort of pick and choose. So it's seeing
in
what's out there.
telco still, in networking, or openness to move into other industries as well?
Oh yeah, no, I think I would lavish another telco role. I think I've got some knowledge and stuff I could bring to other telcos.
Indeed. Even OSS BSS vendors, potentially?
Potentially, yeah. No, I wouldn't rule anything out, that's for certain. I'd take every opportunity as I read them. But I certainly am looking for something that I can actually really sort of dig my teeth into and really stand behind and sort of really enjoy working on. I mean, that's what has been key for me, and that's why I've been at Cirrus Swoop for 12 years, is that, the product we built, still firmly believe in it, and I do hope that they they enjoy using it up well after I'm gone and keep developing and everything. I'm sure they will.
All the blood, sweat and tears that have gone into it.
Literal blood, sweat and tears. We all know racks cut people.
Yeah, probably racks. Less so now that you've migrated to cloud, less blood.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, haven't had a good server rack cut for a good 5 or 6 years now. It's been great.
Yeah. So I'm sure the listeners have really enjoyed your insights. And where can they find you to continue the conversation and maybe even to offer up some opportunities?
Yeah, well, I've got my Twitter, I think, is at Steve Coates, and I've got my website, which is just stephenwhite.com.au. There's a contact form there, and LinkedIn as well. I haven't really been a big follower of LinkedIn, but I've recently found how good it is for networking and catching up with people you haven't talked to in a while and potential employers. So
yeah, absolutely. It seems to be a common theme on these podcasts, is that's the connection point. That's the common point that links us all together.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thanks very much for being the guest on the podcast tonight there, Stephen. I really appreciated the insight. It's been really fantastic.
No, thanks for having me. It's my first podcast, so I can't say I've ever been invited to do something like this before, and it's been fun. Yeah, I hope I've provided some food for thought for some people.
Absolutely.
Challenged some perceptions.
Absolutely. Hopefully it's the first of many of the podcasts.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, and so thanks again also to the audience listening in. Look forward to bringing another one of these episodes to you shortly. Thanks for listening to the Passionate About OSS podcast. You can find more episodes, more than 2,500 blogs, and our contact details over at passionateaboutoss.com.